I can start the sermon now? Oh, hey guys, so listen, I've only been in the state of Oklahoma once, and that doesn't seem like a significant fact, but, it is also true. I've only really been in Oklahoma. I guess I've driven through it a couple times, but the only time I've ever stayed like the night in Oklahoma was 8 years ago. Stephanie and I were in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the home of the best shepherd's pie I've ever eaten, speaking of food. It was a little British pub that we went to late at night. Best shepherd's pie I've ever eaten. I'd go back there in a heartbeat. But that is not the point of the story. The point of the story is we were in Tulsa, Oklahoma for a concert, actually. We were out of town when one of my favorite bands had come through Columbia, and so we ended up driving to Tulsa to see Jimmy Eat World. Now, you may or may not know who Jimmy Eat World is, but I know that you know who Jimmy Eat World is because they had this one song on the radio 21 years ago called The Middle that got in your head endlessly, and you hated it by the end of the summer. Like, I know you did. Me too. I get it, okay? This is one of my favorite bands, and that song drove me crazy in the summer of 2000 or 2001 or whatever it was. But they've been a band for like 30-some years, and I've been listening to them, like Stephanie and I have been listening to them for like our entire adult lives. And so we had never seen them, and in 2014, 8 years ago, they were celebrating the anniversary of what's probably their best album. And so there was this cool show, like this super interesting tour, where they were actually playing the whole album. The album's called Futures. The whole album, start to finish, taking like a 10-minute break, and then playing a regular set afterwards. So this ended up being like a 27 or 28 song night, like 2-hour show. And it was, we had to get to that. So Tulsa was the closest, as it turns out. And so we went to Tulsa. And so on this night, we're in a place called Kane's Ballroom, about 2,000 people. It's sold out. It's a giant room. There's no, there's like one stage and then just like a gym floor, basically. And it's this huge room, 2,000 people standing around, milling around. And, Stephanie are there, and band starts, show starts, and the first song is just perfect. Like, the band sounds great. Everyone is freaking out because if you're at this show and you're getting like 2 hours of Jimmy Eat World, more than just the middle. Like, you're a big fan, and you're really excited, and everybody is just incredibly excited. Everyone is so happy, and it's a really good time. So the first song was great. Then the second song started. And guys, I gotta understand. You guys understand. I've been going to shows since I was like a 6th grader. Like, this is like going to concerts, one of my favorite things. And I've been to more shows than I can count. I've seen more bands than I can count. Good, bad, in between. I've been around different crowds. Good, bad, in between. This is a completely unique experience that had never happened before and has not happened since going to shows. The second song, I hear over the music somebody behind me. I should backtrack. It wasn't that she was behind. I mean, she was physically behind me, but I heard her like in my ear right here. Like she had taken up residence, like she was camping in my eardrum, just right here. The loudest, drunkest person. Like, this is the second song of the headliner. I have no idea what this girl looked like by the end of the night. The loudest, drunkest person. Just right here in my ear. She is so loud that we're in a room that's basically like a cave. Like, the band is so loud, and she is louder than this band. And she's just right here. And it's not, look, okay, if she was just loud, it's a punk rock show, right? Like, it's loud, everybody is yelling, everybody's doing whatever. Like, I get it. You're not going to a show in Tulsa, Oklahoma to watch Jimmy Eat World and not expecting to be hassled a little bit by annoying people around you. Okay, like, it's just the way it is, right? Like, you're not at home. But listen, it's not just that she was loud. She had a voice that only a mother could love. And that mother has to be wearing noise-canceling headphones to love that voice. If she were to sing, like, if she was like, I want to sing on stage at Ashland Christian Church, we would mute her vocals. And then we would tell her, you're so loud, you got to quiet down. I like, this was it sounded like an animal that was wounded. Like, I take my dogs on walks late at night all the time, and often we'll hear coyotes like fighting cats or something. It's a horrible sound. Y'all are asleep. It's this horrible sound. This girl sounded worse than that. Like, I have never in my life heard screeching like this. And it's the second song of a 28-song set. And all I can think is, I can't do that. Can't do that. So my first thought is, okay, we should move. Like, we'll just move around. The problem was it's sold out, right? There's nowhere to go, and it want to stand. There's places you want to be, and like, you go and you stake that out, and then that's your spot, and you don't want to move because we've been we watched the opening band, this terrible opening band. We watched this terrible opening band from those spots. Like we were committed to these spots. I didn't want to move. So I thought to myself, like, I'm trying to think as she's screaming into my ear, and I don't know what's happening. And it hits me. Everyone wants to get closer to the stage, right? So this is what I do. Middle of the second song, I turn around. And I'm just very kind. And I'm just very nice. I'm like, hey, excuse me. Would you like to go in front of me? Closer to the stage. This girl's eyes lit up. Smile, ear to ear. Oh, I was her hero. All she wanted was to get close to her musical heroes, Jimmy Eat. She wanted to get there. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. Oh, of course. No, I know. I can give up this spot. You can be in front of me. Just go in front of me. It'll be okay. And so I put her in front of me. She's so happy. She's so drunk. She's so happy. And so, it's problem solved, right? It's the second song. So the third song happens. And that's when this gets really good. The girl in front of me, what I hadn't really considered, well, I don't know that I cared exactly, is that now she's just singing in someone else's ear. And I'm watching because I'm kind of nosy. And I'm watching. And I see the guy who's now in front of her turn around like, I mean, he is just the same reaction as me. And I'm watching, I'm like, I want to see how this plays out. And I'm like elbowing Stephanie, like, because of course she knows what's going on the whole time. I'm like, Stephanie, look at this. See what's going on. Third song of the night. This guy, I'm not kidding. This is not an exaggeration. I'm not making this up. This guy turns around, says something to her, and she goes in front of him. He came up with exactly the same solution. And she disappears in the night. I don't know what happened to her after that. I hope she was okay. But like I said, she was drinking. And I hope she was fine. But in my mind, as the night progressed, by song 12 or so, she's at the stage. Because everyone just keeps ushering her closer. And I want to think that, like, by the time the first part of the set's over, that the band that she's screaming at has said, you know what, you can go backstage. It's fine. Just by yourself. Be backstage. Just do that. I would love to think about that. I don't know, though. So I tell you the story just to illustrate a pretty simple principle. You can do something selfless for extremely selfish reasons. Like, I let this girl go in front of me. That was very nice of me. But I was not doing it to be nice. There was no part of my body. There was no bone in my body. That I didn't have a nice bone in my body. Like, there was nothing nice about it. I wanted rid of this girl. And so I was very, very nice to her. I did a selfless act, but I did it extremely selfishly. And see, I think that's where things get tricky for us as Christians, for us as people. I think this is where things get pretty tricky because there are selfish actions and there are selfish motives. Those are two different things. And then there are selfless actions and there's selfless motives. You can do something that's like accidentally selfish, but you tried to do it selflessly. You can. You can do something that is wildly selfish or selfless, but also it was, for selfish motives. Like, you can do something for yourself, but it benefits other people. You can do something for other people that, whatever. Like, they're two separate things. And it would be so easy if it's just, hey, like being selfish, like not being selfish, this whole pursuit. We talked about last week that the core of Christianity is selflessness, okay? Jesus says the entire premise of Christianity is to love God and love other people. You can't do that selfishly, right? To love God means putting God above yourself, putting God in his will and in what he wants and all that. That is an inherently selfless thing, right? And to love other people at the way that you would love yourself, that is again inherently selfless. You can't love other people the way you love yourself and be selfish about it. It's like those would be oxymorons. The core of Christianity is being selfless. And it would be easy if it was just, we'll make sure you do selfless stuff. That would be at least relatively, that would be easy. But the trouble is, Jesus very specifically taught us that there are selfish actions and there are selfish motives, and those are two different things. And Jesus explicitly taught us that we need to kind of have those aligned. It doesn't really count, so to speak, to do something selfless if you're doing it for a selfish reason. This is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, Sermon on the Mount. This is like the absolute ground floor core of Jesus' teaching. In the middle of the most important sermon he ever preaches, this is what we read from Jesus. Jesus says, "Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly, to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth. They have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you." Jesus is talking about this selfish action, or this selfless action, but it's a selfish motive. Those two words are way too close to each other. Keep getting it wrong. Jesus talking about Jesus is being sarcastic. He's being funny. This is Jesus joking around. He's like, they're in the synagogues. They're blowing trumpets to alert everyone. Hey, look at me. Look how cool I am. Look how good I am. Look how he's painting this picture that's sort of absurd, but also in a world of social media, we know that it happens constantly. This is who we are. In a world where, everything is about us, everything's about attention, people are constantly looking for affirmation, whether they did anything to be affirmed or not. We live in a culture now that we understand that there are people literally blowing trumpets saying, look how good I am. Look how great I am. Look at all the things I'm doing. And what Jesus is telling us is you can do something very good. You can give to the poor, or, you can do, he says good deeds. You can do good deeds, but if you do them for the wrong reason, your reward is limited. Jesus talks about two different rewards here. There's a reward from God, and there's a reward from people. And Jesus' whole point is, if what you're doing is selfish, if what you're doing is to impress people, you just might get that done. You might be able to convince people that you're a good person. You may be able to convince people that you're doing the right thing. You may be able to convince people that you're somebody worth following and emulating and celebrating. But if what you're doing is selfish, whatever reward you get from people, that's all the reward you're going to get. So high five, congratulations. Whatever praise you can get from people, that's yours. On the other hand, if what you do is out of pure motives, if what you do is it's a selfless action done selflessly, you're not doing it while blowing trumpets in the streets. You're not doing it to get anybody to think you're impressive. You're not doing it because you want somebody to think you're cool. You're not doing it because you want people to think, oh, how pious that guy is, or how devout that woman is. If what you do is simply selflessness for the sake of selflessness, then it is God who rewards you, whether anybody else does. What Jesus is essentially saying is, look, we live in a world filled with annoying girls at the concert, okay? And if the way you respond to that is a selfish action, but it looks selfless, congratulations, whatever reward. My reward at the Jimmy Eat World concert was the girl smiling and being happy. That was it. That's what you get, right? I didn't have to listen to her the whole time. But if we are people who can truly be selfless, if our motives align with our actions, something that's very, very difficult, then God has something for us as well. All of this leads to a conversation that we need to have about somebody who showed us just how difficult this journey is, just how difficult this whole thing is, and at the end sort of gets to a place where we can figure out how we can do this a little bit, and that is a guy by the name of David. Now, if I say David, and we're talking about like the Bible David, and we're talking about selfishness, what you should think of is the story of David and Bathsheba. I want you to think of that. You should think of that. There is probably no more selfish story in the entire Bible, and we don't need to go into it in great detail. You guys either know the story or, it's there in your Bible. You can read it. But this is a story where David is, in every step of the way, is selfish. Like, he's supposed to be out at war. He's supposed to be leading his troops. He has a duty to do as a king, as a leader, defending his country, right? That's his duty. He's not doing it because he's selfish. And while everybody else is off doing their duty, while everyone else is off doing what they're supposed to be doing, he is back home leering at women who are trying to not be leered at. Like, all this woman Bathsheba wanted was to bathe in peace. She's on a rooftop, meaning no one else can see her. Unless, of course, you are the one guy who's living in a palace who should be trusted to not leer at people. And yet, there he was, being selfish and leering at this woman. And that leering, of course, became an invitation to this woman, which, when you're the king and you're the only, you're the only authority in the nation, and also your husband is gone because he's off doing what he's supposed to be doing, invitations like that don't really seem like invitations. And so despite the fact that no doubt Bathsheba wanted no part of this, David, he did what he wanted to do, selfishly. And of course, she ends up pregnant. And so now that's a problem. It's interesting at this point in the story, I'm not sure we ever considered that all David has to say is, oh yeah, I did that. And what are the people going to do? He's literally the king. No one's going to rebuke him. I mean, like, I guess somebody does, like the prophet does, but nobody can like physically tell him no. He's literally the king. All he has to say is, "Oh yeah, I totally did that," and that could be the end of the story. But instead, he exacerbates the problem by trying to cover it up selfishly. He wants the people to think he's something he's not. He wants the people to think that he's this good, godly man. And so he tries to set it up so the woman's husband is the one who takes responsibility for the child. That doesn't work because that guy actually is a good, godly man. And then in the end, all he can do is to try to fix it is have the guy killed. And so he does that selfishly. And this whole story, start to finish, with David and Bathsheba, is one man's selfishness played out over and over and over. It's played out in, his desire to not do his duty. It's his desire to take something that's not his. It's his desire to force a woman to do something she doesn't want to do. It's in his desire to try to cover that up because he's prideful. It's in his desire to, kill a man who's everything he's not. That is a story of incredible selfishness. When we think of David and selfishness, we should think of that story. But also, you guys are adults. You guys are reasonable, rational, thinking people. There is very little reason for me to try to preach an entire sermon or like what's my point here? Like, don't do that stuff. You guys know that, okay? If you don't know not to do that stuff, we need to rewind and go through like 10 more sermons, okay? I'm assuming we're at the point where we are in our spiritual walks with Christ. You don't need to be told, don't be David in the story of David and Bathsheba. And I guess if you need to be told that, don't be David in the story of David and Bathsheba, and the rest of us can move on. I'm less interested in learning anything from that. I'm more interested in learning about the time that David went to the Jimmy Eat World concert. He did something that was good, and it was selfless, but it was extremely selfish. And that is the one story of David's life that is even more famous than the story of David and Bathsheba, and that is the time that David killed Goliath. So, you guys know the story. Again, I don't need to go into a tremendous amount of detail here. You guys know, like, as human people alive in the world of the earth, you guys absolutely know the story of David and Goliath. But a couple little details here. So David is a kid when all this happens. You guys know that. But at this point, all David is an assistant to King Saul. Or a squire, maybe. I don't know exactly what the word is. King Saul is the guy who's in charge of everything, and David helps him out. He plays music. He writes songs, and he plays the harp, and he's like the guy who takes his acoustic guitar to the campfire and kind of annoys everybody. But King Saul loves it. He's all about, him playing Wonderwall over and over. So he's just like, hey, here we go. Come play for me. And so that's what David does. And the people of Israel end up at war with their enemies, the Philistines, the nation of Philistia, while David is a boy, the harpist, basically. And so Saul that's the role. And so Israel and Philistia, they fought a lot. They have a lot of battles. They have a lot of struggles. They have a lot of things. But when push comes to shove at this point, things are different. Because see, Philistia has Goliath. And we always think about Goliath being like this, we call him the giant, But he was just really this huge hulking guy. He's probably the greatest soldier on earth at this time. He's like 9 feet tall. Like he's got like a pituitary problem, guys. Like he's a massive guy, right? Like think the Mountain in Game of Thrones or like the Big Show in wrestling or whatever frame of references you have. Just this massive hulking guy. Like his armor is heavier than like most people can even carry, and he's wearing it around. And his spear is just this massive thing that like people can't even pick up. Goliath he's just this undefeated champion. And so it's an opportunity if you're the Philistines to defeat Israel without taking losses yourself. I don't know that we think about this very often, but battles in the ancient world were bad. Like they weren't good, because they don't have medicine. You get like a nick on, somebody like nicks you with their sword and it gets infected and like your leg falls off. Like it's the last thing you want is any physical altercation. So much of the ancient world, when we talk about actual wars and battles, so much of it is bravado, it's bragging, it's trying to intimidate the other side into not fighting, because even if you can win, if you go to war, you've already lost, because it's just such a brutal, ugly thing. So Goliath says, all right, here's what we're going to do. I don't want anyone else to die but one person. You, Israel, you guys send me your champion. We'll have one-on-one combat. The winner, it's going to be me, the winner takes the other side as slaves. Everybody lives, everybody wins, other than the slaves, and it'll be fine. Like, that's what we'll do. And that's Goliath's plan. It's interesting because Goliath is like, he's painted as this bad guy, but we should understand he's just a guy. And this plan is a fairly common thing in the ancient world. The problem is the people of Israel look at this and they say, well, we don't have anybody that can fight that guy. We don't have any, we don't have a champion. There's no one to fight this guy. So we'll just tell him we're thinking about it and we'll let him know. We'll get back to you. Your offer's a good one. We'll get back to you, though. And they do that, and they put it off for like 6 weeks. So if you can imagine it, for like 6 weeks, these two armies are camped just like opposite of each other, and they're just staring at each other. And Goliath, day after day, every single day, is offering this challenge, is offering this, hey, look, we can end this right now. Just send me somebody to fight, winner take all, and we'll be slaves to you guys if you guys win, and you guys can be slaves if we win, and that'll be that. No one wants to do it because, of course, it's essentially suicide to do this. Nobody beats Goliath. And, of course, we know David does. But the interesting thing about David is we often focus on, because we were all, if you were raised in church, if you weren't raised in church, you probably can imagine David's the hero of the story. If we always focus on the good stuff that David says and does. So here's a really sort of iconic, famous passage from this story in the book of 1 Samuel about all of this. This is David talking to Goliath, and it says, David replies to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head, and then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear, that this is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. Now, of course, outside of some of the grislier stuff in that passage, this really seems devout and good and nice and selfless. David's not thinking about himself here. He's thinking about, number one, God, And he's upset that, that Goliath has, mocked God, and he's upset that the God of the people of Israel has been, the good name of God has been besmirched by the Philistines and all of that. He's putting God first, and he wants everyone in the world, he says. I think he says the whole world. He wants he wants everybody to see that God is real and God is good and God is just and all of that. And he's not just doing this for God, but he's doing this for God's people. He wants people to see that God's people are taken care of. Theoretically, when we talk about how we're supposed to love God and love other people, this sure, in the context of, a war in the ancient world, thousands of years ago, this sounds like loving God and loving other people. This is putting God first, and this is putting people first. This is the sort of thing that when preachers like me preach the sermons about David and Goliath, this is what we read. However, that is not all that is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. That is not all that is in this story. In fact, this is late in the story. If we rewind a little bit to the first moment that David enters the story, we'll see something that's really interesting. This is what we read. That was verses 45 to 47. This is verses 22 to 28. Let's read this. David left his things with the keeper of supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers, to see them at the battlefield. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. David asked the soldiers nearby, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he's allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" And these men gave David the same reply. They said, "Yes, that is the reward for killing him." See, we think of David, maybe I just think of David because, I've been taught this whole thing my whole life, but I tend to think of David as, he's this, kind of like pipsqueak kind of little kid, and, he's got the power of faith and the word of God in his heart, and, he is doing everything he can to defend the honor of Israel and put God first. And I suppose there's a degree to which maybe that's a fair estimation, depending on the way we tell the story. But before David is any of that, David's a kid who overhears that if you kill the giant, you get to marry the king's daughter, which is, it's not just about like, man, she's beautiful, I'd love to marry her. No, you are now part of the royal family. That is a position in the royal court for the rest of your life. That is life at the palace forever. It is wild how crazy that is and how high that you rank when you do that. And if that's not enough, not only do you not have to pay taxes like forever, you're exempt, but your whole family. So now your family gets to build wealth instead of paying taxes. While everybody else is paying taxes and paying their fair share, they get to build generational wealth forever. The reward for killing Goliath is not just a cushy, privileged life for you, but this sets up your children and your children's children and your children's children's children. It takes care of your parents if you have them. It takes care of your brothers and your sisters, your cousins, your uncles. Like, your whole family is exempt. This sets up your family line for generations. David shows no interest in fighting Goliath until he hears that. And he hears that. And I love this about David. I love this in the story. David's like, whoa, hold up. I just need to double check just to make sure. Just so I understand. So you're telling me if I go fight that guy and I win, I get all of that. And then I love the way the story is written. The Bible does this a lot. The Bible tells you something, and then it tells you again, and then it tells you again. It's why the Old Testament is such a slog to read through. But it tells you 3 separate times, yeah, that's what you get. The writer who wrote this wanted us to know that David starts out as a man not trying to defend God, not trying to defend his people. He is a guy who is out for a reward. And it's like he's talking himself into. He's like, well, who's that giant anyway? I could probably take him. Yeah, probably. And then later he was talking to Saul. He's like, I've killed like lions and bears and stuff. I can take care. Like, this is a completely irrational thing until you understand that David is out for the reward. And look, I don't begrudge people getting paid for their labor. I'm not begrudging people but it's really important that we understand that when David ends up killing Goliath and the people of Israel celebrate him, and they celebrate him as greater than Saul. Like there's specifically, we're told, there's like songs in the streets, dancing in the streets of people like, yeah, Saul killed these people, but David killed more. Like there's all this stuff. Like when David got all of that, it's so important that we understand that David didn't do this selflessly. This was not an act of devotion to anyone. This was David saying, I would love that reward. I would love to be part of the royal family. I would love to not pay taxes. I would love to set up my family forever. Again, it's not bad to do stuff that benefits you. But Jesus said that when we are selfish, that is all the reward we will get. And the problem is when we confuse selfishness for selflessness. The people of Israel thought David was something. They thought David was this mighty hero. And of course he was. I mean, he does do the thing, but they thought he had done this for them. They thought that's how it was. And so the publicity for David it's not here's this guy doing this thing that benefits him. It's here is this selfless hero that we should all follow. And I don't think it's a coincidence that from that moment forward, we are now on a path to David and Bathsheba. You see, the most famous story of David is a selfish motive for a selfless action. And then you fast forward in his story and you have a selfish action with a selfish motive. There is a direct straight line from A to B. A direct line. When we don't get our selfish motives under control, they will become selfish actions 100% of the time. What is done in the dark will come out in the light. Eventually, people will see our true colors. And if we are selfish people presenting as people who are not selfish, eventually, that presentation, it'll fall apart because that's all it is. It's a presentation. It's like when I was in school, man, I was so good at pretending like I knew stuff. Oh, I was so good at it. Like, man, you give me like the big poster board and some markers and 20 minutes, and I will convince every teacher ever that I know all the stuff about any topic you want. Oh man, you give me 10 minutes. I can pretend like I know something about something for 10 minutes anything. I don't know if you guys, like, I can talk, okay, guys? And if you give me a visual aid, like 4th grade Drew is killing it. But eventually, you let me keep going long enough, and it's real obvious that, Drew, you don't know anything. Like, you actually just copied those words out of, like, the headline of a book. That's all you did there. Like, eventually, we get found out. And David, in the story of David and Goliath, I'm not trying to ruin the story. I guess I maybe a little bit, but I'm just maybe adding some depth to it. But this is David at a concert, like, hey, absolutely, you go ahead. Like, this is David being selfish, selflessly. And eventually he becomes selfish, selfishly. And at the end of that, David's a mess. And this sermon is a little bit of a downer if we just stop here. So let's not stop here. After all this, we have this psalm where David ends up writing. It's this terrible psalm. Actually, tomorrow night at Bible study, we're going to probably pick this psalm apart. We're definitely going to. We're going to pick it apart. Psalm 51 is awful. It's a whole other thing. But in the midst of this, we see how broken of a person David is. Like his entire world, his entire framework is just a mess. And like he's contradicting himself, and he is just so overcome with grief, because Psalm 51 is him coming to God in prayer and saying, I not only did I mess up with Bathsheba, but my entire life up to this point has been messed up. And he's coming to God looking for help, and he doesn't even know how to start. And towards the end, he finally says the quiet part out loud. And it's one of my favorite lines in the entire Bible. And it's at the end of Psalm 51. This is what David ends up saying in this psalm. We read this. David says, "Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin, for I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night." Then he says, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation. Make me willing to obey you. Then I will teach your ways to rebels, and they will return to you." That line, "make me willing to obey you," is like the first honest thing David has said in years, I feel like. Like David, he's at this point, he's the king. Forever, everybody thinks he's something he's not. And he's finally like, "God, look, I can't obey you. I'm not doing it right. I'm not going to do it right. Like, I just keep doing just dumb stuff over and over and over. I can't stop being." His prayer, it's one of the greatest prayers. "God, make me willing to obey you. You're going to have to be the one to help me to even want to do this. It's not just help me to obey you. It's help me to be willing to obey you." David is saying, "God, I don't want to obey you. I don't." And he's asking God to help him. The beauty of that, of course, is what we see before. God is God of mercy and kindness and unfailing love. I feel like we should always, whenever we see a failing love, we should always say love that does not fail. Love that God is love, and God is love that does not fail. God does not fail ever. And that's that's the heart of the gospel, is that God never fails ever. But I also think David finally gets an honest thing. Again, Psalm 51 is just so much this bluster and bravado and false humility. It's just a mess of a psalm. But finally, "God, make me do this." I think at the end of the day, when we talk about being selfish, this is probably the toughest. There's a whole in the series called "Stop Being Selfish," and we talked about last week. This is a journey, and I think this is the hardest part. This is the toughest one. We're on the downhill from here as we talk about this subject. This is the toughest one. Because, man, we can cover ourselves so easily. We can be the most selfish people on earth and no one ever see it. We can present as selfless every day. But Jesus taught us that doesn't do us any good. It just doesn't. That doesn't count to God. And what we see in the story of King David is that when we are faking it, eventually it does fall apart. And we can get to the place where we are so far that it's like, I don't even want to obey you right now. I may know I need to, but I don't even want to. And when we're there, that's when things get really, really desperate. For us, I think we have to learn this lesson. We have to learn this, first of all, that being selfish is not about our actions all the time. It is often about why we do things. That doing things selfishly, or doing things that are selfless, but we're doing it for a selfish reason, that's not what we're looking for here. But also, the psalm is right in this place where God's love never fails. Never. God is merciful. God is kind. And when David said, "God, make me willing," God does that. God changes us. God helps us. And maybe the most honest, sincere prayer we can ever give to God is, "God, I am extremely selfish. And I don't even want to not be selfish. But I want to not be selfish. right? That is me constantly. Selfishness is awesome. Looking out for number one is wonderful. It feels good. It's often disastrous, but it feels good in the moment. And so as Christians, as people who are following Christ, who understand who God is through what Christ has taught as the way, the truth, and the life, that he is love, he is light, he is life that never ends, that is God. We can come to God and say, God, look, I want to obey you. And we can come to God and seek help. And we're probably going to have to do that day in and day out, over and over and over, for the rest of our lives, because this stuff is really, really hard. This morning, we're in our second week of our series called Stop Being Selfish. As we talk about how the core of Christianity is not being selfish, the core of Christianity is, in fact, a journey in which we learn to not be selfish. And we learn from David, whose journey was a doozy. We come across this lesson. Our second lesson from our series on not being selfish is this: selfish motives eventually become selfish actions. With God's help, Jesus wants us to repent of both. Selfish motives eventually become selfish actions. With God's help, Jesus wants us to repent of both. Musicians are going to go forward. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week for us to take Christ up on his offer of us to know God. The Bible teaches we're to repent and be baptized. It sounds like two things. It's really just one. In repentance, it's a matter of change. It's just a changing who we are and changing what we want to be and saying, I want to do things God's way. Baptism is just a picture of that. In baptism, we align ourselves with Christ. Just as Christ died, was buried, and raised, we in baptism are aligning ourselves, joining Christ in his death, burial, and resurrection. We are given his spirit. We are made brand new, forgiven of sin, and that's who we are with Christ forever. If you never made a decision, nice warm bastard, we can do it anytime. Let's talk. If you aren't an immersed believer in Christ, we're looking for a perfect church home. This is not it, but we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate, we want to meet new people, we want to share the gospel, we want to grow up while we do it. We want to stop being selfish. As we stand,